Bob, thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you, most importantly, for the wonderful work you do across our country. I've had the privilege of watching all kinds of urban support organizations and societal support organizations, and Americans for the Arts has certainly done a fabulous job, and Bob Lynch is one of the big reasons why. It's also a pleasure to welcome Ken Ferguson as chair, and to thank and congratulate the local leadership, Felix Padron, who's been recognized as the current director of the San Antonio Office of Cultural Affairs. And it's good to know that Bob Cannon is in the audience. Bob, I remember your wonderful work. I also want to recognize and congratulate all of the award recipients, including some of the local figures like Chris Sauter, who received an award a few days ago for the Mission Branch Library Development. And I also want to recognize, I don't think he's here this morning, but my brother, some of you know George Cisneros, who is a longtime artist, his group Urban 15, that includes a dance group and laser work. And the truth of the matter is, aside from Bob, George is the principal reason I'm here today. He called me some months ago and said, you have 15 minutes to decide. Can you be there that morning? And so I owe George this invitation and gratitude as well. Let me just say, because I want to get through this very quickly and get on to the panel, I'm honored to be part of that panel, that geographers describe as an ecotope a place of convergence of various geographic and topographical factors. So San Antonio is defined as a place that has the Gulf savanna to the southeast, the hot ranch lands to the southwest, the beautiful hill country to the northwest, and black farmland to the northeast. And it makes out of San Antonio a special geographic place. It's one of the reasons that we have the headwaters of the San Antonio River here that come out of those limestone escarpments. But we're also a congruence of histories, from the indigenous people who first lived here for thousands of years and named the place Yanaguana, which meant in their dialect, the place of the peaceful waters, that same river that we enjoy today. To the Spaniards who came in 1691 and left their language and institutions, to the period when we were part of Mexico during the Revolution, to the great Texas Republic that brought Irish and Scots here, to the emergence of the Lone Star State of Texas as part of the United States. And with it came immigrants from Italy and from Lebanon and China and Japan, African Americans. So much so is this place a congruence of cultures that the theme of the World's Fair that was held here in 1968, Hemisphere, was the confluence of cultures. Now, all of that mix made for a pretty contentious place through much of our history. We were unsettled, a legacy of racial and ethnic discrimination. But since 1968, a consensus has emerged around some key themes: the need for jobs and incomes and education and a sense of inclusive governance, which has characterized our city, but all of that undergirded by the emergence of an overarching cultural connection. What has emerged is a rich, fun, creative, interconnected ethos that is more than the sum of its parts. It's music where country meets Tejano, food where barbecue meets fajitas, architecture, the San Antonio School of Architecture that came out of the Depression that focused on local materials, limestone, and human scale. The Riverwalk is a product of that. The visual arts, Chicano art, Western masters, avant-garde experimenters, museums from the traditional to the Smithsonian's only Latino Heritage Museum and only museum outside of Washington, community expression in the murals that dot our city, the largest African-American Martin Luther King celebration in the United States. We have 30,000 people come together in January on Martin Luther King's birthday every year of all ethnic groups. The largest Diwali celebration of Indians in the United States, Japanese and Asian and many other cultures. A fashion where South Texas Ranch meets Latino hot, and gatherings like our Fiesta Week, where we have literally 300,000 people come downtown several days over the 10-day period for major events. Our Luminarias Arts Festival that my brother helped create and the Texas Folklife Festival, which is going on right now, and film and sculpture and dance. But there's a larger story here than San Antonio, and we see it in the role of culture in cities across the nation. In Atlanta, as a capital of African American expression in the United States. Chicago, where every block is a celebration of prairie architecture or the blues or ethnic neighborhoods. New Orleans, where after Katrina, a serious question was asked: have we lost an American city? And books have been written on the subject of why New Orleans cannot be lost because of its unique cultural contributions to the American scene. Los Angeles, where that enviable aggregation of talent is coming together to create a city with a core. That place which was once referred to as a place where there is no there, today has a core. And Chattanooga and Fort Worth and Seattle and Charleston and Memphis and Boston and the core city, inner city of Washington, D.C. Something big is going on in American cities. It is urban, it is real, and it is transformative. And I would describe it as the convergence of two big forces, two historic forces. One of them is the gathering force of global urban preeminence. For the first time in world history last year, demographers tell us, more people lived in urban areas in the world than in rural areas. For the first time in the history of mankind, places like Shanghai and Singapore and Tokyo and London and Paris are the engines that drive the world not just in its economics and diplomacy, but in the soft power of culture and creativity. In the United States, 85% of the American population lives in urban areas. 65% in just the 100 largest urban areas. And that 65% produces 75% of the country's GDP in those places, 78% of the patents and creative work. No question, America's metropolitan areas are the engines of the American economy. This is a golden moment in the urban renaissance. Mark my words, despite the fact that we are down a bit now because of the recession that we've just come through, right around the corner is a major urban renaissance. We saw it in the 1990s when cities like New York hit their peak of population, and the downtowns of Atlanta and Denver and Dallas came back after decades of decline. Chicago, a turnaround of 50 years of population loss, began to gain population during the 1990s. After this downturn is through, believe me, what we're going to see is the convergence of a number of factors. A new American economy that is good to urban areas. It's new media, it's international trade, it's the biosciences, it's healthcare, it's higher education, anchor institutions that are staying and fighting for their cities, universities and medical centers. It's entrepreneurial city governments, it's community development corporations that are positive factors in the emergence of cities. It's infrastructure investment and energy realities, including the need to address climate change. It's income integration of new populations living together, thanks to the removal of some of the worst problems of urban areas. Excuse me. And it's demographic realities like immigrants and empty nesters and the creative class coming to our cities. All of these combine to create a global urban culture. This is real, as I say, and it's certainly one of the factors that colors the world that we're going to live in. But the second historic factor that I would describe to you is the growing awareness of factors that make physical places and economic places into human places. And that's the emergence of placemaking and the role of human ideas, the alignment of human energies that go under the rubric of culture, design, aesthetics, artistic endeavors, expressiveness, celebrative, spiritual, inclusive, uplifting, communicative, commemorative, all of these on a human scale. These are forces that are more powerful than government declarations, more durable than economic cycles, more evocative than demographic trends. because they touch the human heart. They respect memory. They build on legacy. They stir imagination. They call forth our souls. They have the capacity to transform us from warring tribes into community. They connect us as people. I've seen it in San Antonio. The prejudices that pulled us apart could only have been overcome by a new sense of connection. No policies could have done it. No economic plan could have done it. No election outcome alone could have done it. We had to become connected. And that's what happened as we found common ground largely through the expressive dimensions of the human spirit. And that's what you do fundamentally, is forge human connections. The athleticism of the dancer, the genius of the painter, the skill of the sculptor, the imagery of the poet, the power of the writer, they all have the capacity to awe, to inspire, to disarm, to humanize the public discourse. So we live in a time where we have these two very important dynamics, these convergence of forces. The reality of our urban places becoming more important, and an awareness, a recognition, an appreciation that they cannot function without human connections that are real. From time immemorial, these places we call cities have been the places where we live, where we work and trade, where we pray, where we learn, where we govern ourselves and create a social compact, and where we gather. And those functions are just as true today as they were in Mesopotamia or the Middle East or China or Renaissance Europe. At every level of these key urban functions is the need to connect human beings. This is not a sideshow. This is core to the functions of our urban areas and will be as true in modern technological infrastructure advanced cities as it has been from time immemorial. We're at a historic juncture where your work is more important than ever. We must work to sustain federal funding for the arts and build coalitions, not just as artists, but with community builders, because our mission is the same. We must put forward local plans for the arts that are integrated into community development and economic development, as we have done in San Antonio. This city couldn't function without its imagery, without its identity, which is totally this notion of the coming together of cultures. And it is one of our major industries. It's one of the reasons why we thrive the way we do. You could go across the country and identify the places, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, where this is precisely, Miami. We must find ways to make our diversity, excuse me, our principal virtue. Let me restate that. To make our diversity not just something we have to deal with, not just something that is to be overcome, but a principal virtue. We will make this country greater out of the richness that is the tapping of the strengths of our diversity. In San Antonio, we like to say, this is a place where the future is happening now. The future of bringing people together, the future of deciding things together, the future of finding consensus solutions out of the implacable disagreements, the means by which we govern ourselves, and where we learn lessons of fairness, models of governance that are inclusive and respectful. It's not an accident when I talked to Bob some days ago that the fundamental purposes of American for the Arts are these themes of finding ways to integrate into local initiatives, to build around community development, to celebrate our diversity, to learn lessons of fairness and share them across the generations. In the final analysis, I know this: for all of the advances we make, technological, medical, electronic, transportation, that increase the pace and complexity of life, We are first humans, with our joys and sorrows, with our hopes and disappointments, with our genius and our flaws, our stories, our memories, our talents, our ambitions, and we must build our communities on understanding and respect and meaningful connections. Thank you for what you do for making our cities better and for helping shape the future of our world. Thank you very much for allowing me to come over and be with you.
See what I'm talking about? Mr. Secretary, that was spectacular. Thank you so much. I would like our other panelists to come up and join me on the stage, and once they're here, I'll say a word about each of them. But I'll start off by saying that today, community leaders across the country are abuzz with the concept of placemaking, and we've heard a variety of references and even different explanations of what that is. The reality is our local arts leaders have known and worked for over 50 years, and much longer actually, that the arts can help create a sense of place, as we've just heard. But why has it been hard for our leaders coast to coast to understand the impact that the arts can have in this kind of downtown revitalization or community building? So that's something that we this morning are going to get a chance to talk about, how to take something that is wonderfully understandable and make it real. And so as I've invited the panelists to take their seats, you'll see that we've brought together leaders from the many sectors that all of you, partner with every day. Business, the foundation world, the arts world, the civic leadership world. And it's clear that we must all work together to advance our communities, and the arts, as we all know, are core to that effort. So let me say a word about who we have here. John Michael Schurt is Executive Director of the Trey McIntyre Project in Boise, Ohio, and a dancer, a wonderful dancer, and an innovative force in the contemporary dance world. Built a national support base with board members and funders for this company in Boise from over 40 states. And the City of Boise Economic Development Cultural Ambassador is what he's been named, and is that, and also the U.S. Cultural Ambassador, one of them to Asia for spring 2012. The Dennis Scholl, anchoring the end there for us, is Vice President Arts for the John S. and James Knight Foundation, and he oversees the foundation's national arts program. Some of you have experienced, even at our conferences there, and his Random Acts of Culture. We may have a random act pop up behind him just to pay him back for that. But those are wonderful momentary opportunities of understanding culture and art in a slightly different way in the midst of our everyday lives. That is one of the things that he's done. A collector of contemporary art for over 3 decades. A regional Emmy Award winner for his work in cultural documentaries, I think 2 times. And co-founder of Betts and Scholl, an award-winning wine project, and an attorney and a CPA originally, a Renaissance man at the end of the page there. So, Laura Zucker. Laura is Executive Director of the Los Angeles County Arts Commission, and I actually didn't know this till I read it, that you're the director of the Masters in Arts Management program at Claremont Graduate University. Everybody here is a multitasker. The county, Los Angeles County, is the largest county in the United States. So running the arts in that county and the 88 municipalities that are in that county makes for a busy set of efforts, among which is $4.1 million in grant programs, more than 300 nonprofit arts organizations annually receiving that, 81 school districts who are worked with on the arts education front. So that is Laura Zucker, and I welcome her to the panel today as well. Maria Rosario Jackson is a senior research associate in Metropolitan Housing and Communities Center at the Urban Institute, director of the Institute's Culture, Creativity, and Communities program. And her research expertise includes neighborhood revitalization, community planning, comprehensive community planning, the politics of race, ethnicity, and gender in urban settings, and the role of arts and culture in communities. She has her doctorate in urban planning from the University of California and an MPA from the University of Southern California. So welcome, Maria. And finally, Floyd Green, Vice President and Head of Community Relations, Aetna in Hartford, Connecticut, where he is responsible for developing grassroots marketing strategies and currently a lot of work enhancing current community investment models, including philanthropic investments, to strengthen Aetna's brand. Also involved with and talking about and doing a lot of work here at the convention, helping us understand urban marketing strategies, and in his case, in his work, to increase Aetna's visibility and to address through that the multicultural, multilingual, and generational needs of key constituents across the country. In his spare time, he's a member of Actors Equity Association, the Executive Leadership Council of 100 Black Men of America, and a number of other national institutions. So we have a terrific panel, and I welcome them all here. And I would actually, I'm going to move over here to sit down, and I think this is on as well. Magnificent transition. And I would just like, in the spirit of conversation, to start off with asking each of them, just for a quick 1 minute, either reaction to what they heard Henry Cisneros say, or something about the topic that we have here today. So if we could start with Dennis.
I'd like to rant a little bit, if that's all right.
For a minute.
The 1 minute of rant. The secretary has me kind of riled up after that. I'm pretty excited. And what I want to ask this group is, what role are we going to play in this urban renaissance? We heard from Luis Ubiñas yesterday, and he talked about ArtPlace and the organic bubbling that is going on in your communities. We heard from Randy about the economic contribution that arts is making, and that in a difficult economy, our contribution matters more. So what are we going to do about it? Because that decision, what happens with regard to culture and the urban renaissance, is going to come out of this room. You guys are the guys that are going to make that decision. For the first time, we're feeling a political willingness to acknowledge what arts means economically. We haven't, we've worked at that for a long time. How are we going to seize this moment? How are we going to embrace the things that Bob and his team have been doing for decades, really, on the Hill? How are we going to stand up and claim what's ours? I want a seat at the table, and I want a national cultural policy.
Thank you. Maria.
So there were several things that got my attention this morning. Certainly the idea that we're on the cusp of an urban renaissance, that diversity is our principal virtue, that the arts are core and should be integrated into community development, and that the arts, and why it's important, is more durable than economic cycles. So with that in mind, the questions that come up for me have to do with, how do we seize the moment? How do we integrate arts and culture into how we think of healthy communities, healthy cities? How do we figure out more effective ways of, yes, talking about the economic values, but also talking about the many other values that I think were mentioned here this morning? And how do we do this in a way that we underscore that it is more durable than economic cycles, that it does have this economic value, but that it is more than that?
Great, great. And so far, panelists have been great with the 1 minute. I have a watch, as you can see, that has only a guitar that goes round and round, no numbers on it, so it gives you a lot of flexibility. But my staff doesn't like that very much, right? But Laura.
Well, I was very grateful, Mr. Secretary, to hear that there is a there in Los Angeles. There's a lot of there-theres. There's a lot of there-theres where we all are. You know, when people are surveyed about Los Angeles who live there, they're kind of lukewarm, but when they're asked about their neighborhood, they love it. And that's what we find, I think, more and more everywhere to what you were talking about. But the process that you're talking about is very complex. Colin Hamilton of ArtSpace the other day said that the arts are often called in last during this creative placemaking movement. And so the question becomes, how do we get called in first? And I think one of the reasons that we're called in last is because the complexity of the process that we manage. You know, it's scary to enter into a process without really knowing what the outcomes are going to be and be able to quantify them. And the arts and creativity is that special sauce. If we could bottle it and just sell it to people, I think everyone would want to buy it. But our challenge is to articulate process and have people trust.
Thank you, Laura. That's great. Lloyd?
I think it's very important for the arts organizations to see themselves beyond the arts community and to really visualize themselves as a part of the economic community. And when you change that lens, your perspective and the way you go about your day is a little bit different. For a corporation, it's very important for us to have a vibrant community because it helps us to attract and retain key talent. But also, we're very much interested in the health of the community. Yes, economics is very, very important, but our communities are not healthy. And so we are now beginning to use the arts to help us transform healthcare across the country. In 46 cities across the country and now looking at the world. And I think it's important for the arts organizations to see that they're a part of the solution as opposed to just being a part of the problem.
Terrific. That's great. Please.
In 2008, Trey McIntyre Project was looking where to base ourselves. We are a national international touring company, so we had the luxury of saying, where do we want to live? And we chose Boise, Idaho as our home because we were asking ourselves the exact same questions that we're asking today. How do you be a leader in the community and not just on the periphery in terms of being added last, but how do you get to really be a part of in shaping how a city sees itself and how the world sees that city? We're completing our 4th year now as a resident of Boise, and I think the response that we've received has really blown us away, in that since we've moved there, the city has made us its economic development cultural ambassador. So we officially represent the city as we tour the world, and they invest in us through their economic development fund. We're going into hospitals and schools and doing these programs, and we're getting to be a part of every conversation in terms of how the city is growing, whether it's light rail or community development or urban development. Boise is a small city, it's only 200,000 people, so it still has the feel of being a neighborhood. It is a city that is a neighborhood. The greater metropolitan is 500,000 people. And the thrill of being a dancer and arts executive in Boise is that you have that relationship with the man on the street. When you're walking down the street, they know who you are, they want to get to know you, and they look to you for guidance. And I think the thing that makes it so rewarding, our choice in choosing Boise, Idaho as our home, is that we are partly a reflection of what Boise is, but we're also reflecting back what we think Boise can be. We just got back from a 30-day tour of Asia as a U.S. cultural ambassador, and we got to bring Boise along with us, promoting it to the world. And I think that's the perfect example of how artists have to be envoys and diplomats and foster economic development and bring business to the community, but also bring attention. And I mean, the mayor will tell you it's the best $25,000 they've ever spent in making us the cultural ambassador. It's not a large grant, but what they've gotten back in return is worth millions of dollars in PR and marketing. So I think that I'm hearing a lot of the same questions, and these are questions we've been asking ourselves as well, but we found a lot of answers in choosing a smaller American city as our home, and it's been very successful.
Great. And so I'd like to come back to you. And as you heard here, and first of all, as we heard in your talk, there's both this long historical understanding of the value of the arts in bringing community together, but there's also this moment of time, moment of opportunity, as Dennis ranted about. And but what I'd love your thoughts about what you've just heard here, and I'm going to come back to other folks here, but strategies for us to take advantage of this moment of opportunity.
Well, I think for a long time, the arts were seen by public officials as a sidelight, It's something on the side, softer, fuzzier, and not in the mainstream of sort of core economic or political building of a city. Artists, on the other hand, contributed to that by saying we want independence and, which is all, of course, legitimate and important. But the truth of the matter is that the arts are not truly independent of a city. They're part and parcel, and therefore, as Floyd said, you have to think about it as part of the economic reality, part of the political reality of building a great city. And I think, in some sense, this is now more than ever. John Nesbitt wrote a book, Megatrends, about 20 years ago, in which he described one of the 10 big trends of humanity for our time as what he called the combination of high tech and high touch. A high tech era demands sensitivity about the human dimension. And I think that's clearer than ever. And everybody gets it now because, so many things about humanity, about the direction of our economy and technology, sort of dwarf the human spirit, the human dimension. So everybody understands it. We've come a long, long way. Thanks in part, Bob, to the work that you and Arts for the Americans and others have done. Everybody gets it a little bit more. Now, strategies, and I'll be very brief. Again, Floyd made a good point. Several others around the panel here. I think it's important to integrate the arts as core community building strategy, and recognize the contribution, recognize the unique potential, argue for the funding and build it in, which means we have to kind of find the right language and dialogue to bridge the differences between artists and the political and economic realm, and that's I think doable in a lot of places. People are getting it, and so I think kind of defining the arts as an essential element of the places that we want to live in and build is the challenge.
One of the things to that point that I think is important, and we're trying to accomplish it here at the conference and in our work, but arts organizations learning the language of the other parts of society, talking the kind of talk that the health community talks, or the jobs community talks, or the poverty communities talk. And so those are the kind of workshops that we have here.
Right.
But without that kind of connectivity, you're an outsider.
In this day and time, the principal language is about people's welfare, economic welfare. In Bill Clinton's campaign theme in 1992 was, "It's the economy, stupid." And that really is probably true in 2012.
Yeah.
Again, people want to know about their jobs. This whole battle between now and November is going to be about the mechanics of how we create jobs and incomes and create economic prosperity and share it broadly, and the best mechanisms for doing that. And the arts has to be part of that conversation. That's the language that we've got to learn. So if we start with a kind of a chip on our shoulder as artists, that says, well, we're not part of that, or that taints us, or we want to be independent of that, or we're above that, or we're angry and we're not being funded properly, and you got to put it all in context, which is the priority is people's jobs and incomes. Okay, how are you going to relate to that? Art jobs, art incomes, contributions to the larger mix. There's a lot of places to find common ground, but it's not going to be in an angry discussion about we're not getting our share of funding without justifying it in place of the bigger priorities.
I've been in that meeting that you just described. So, Laura, and then Floyd.
Shift a little bit in terms of strategy. I think we're at this really interesting moment. For years it used to be if it was local, it couldn't be good. We're all familiar with that, right? If it was in our community, it was better somewhere else. It needed somehow an outside imprimatur. And in the last just few years, we've really seen that shift, right? Now it's all about local food sourcing. Let's just eat everything that grows within 100 miles. And there was an article in this morning's San Antonio newspaper about chicken coops and backyard. Chicken coops are huge in LA now. Everyone wants to have their own eggs. And so all of a sudden, local is cool. Local's important. Authenticity is valued. The less far it has to ship, the fresher it is. And I think that that's a tremendous moment for us to build on in terms of our art assets. I mean, we are all in doing the work of building local capacity on the ground, and all of a sudden, in a way, the trend is, we're moving with the waters now. That this is what everyone's interested in. So I think that there's a tremendous asset to be built on here in terms of local is fantastic, local assets, authenticity of place, and an opportunity to bring new voices into the conversation, diverse voices into the conversation, that because of the kind of higher level of noise before, weren't able to be heard. People are putting quarters in parking meters to make parking spaces into little parks right in front of their shop. And where they want it right where they are. And I think that's something that we can build on.
Floyd.
Spend. People have money to spend. And I think the communities are changing all over the world, right? In the United States, they're changing. And arts organizations have to change along with it. They have to be relevant to the community in which they're existing. And they have to reinvent themselves in a way that they're adding value. If not, then folks will go and spend their money someplace else if they feel like there's no value. When coming to us asking for funding, the reality is that the age of entitlement is over. So arts organizations have to think like a business, have to think about what is the return on investment, what is the outcome going to be. A great quote that I heard was that a vision without execution is hallucination. And so many people sit in front of me hallucinating, and so it's like, let's sit down and put together an engagement plan to talk about how the community is going to benefit as a result of the work that we're doing together.
Well, and one thing that you remind me of is that there's wonderful examples of good things happening. We, in our own community of the arts, the greatest storytelling community, ever, need to be better storytellers. We need to tell these stories about our local connectivity or our connection with different aspects of community in a better way, more dynamically and more often. Now, sometimes these strategies can be micro-strategies, and I have a question for you, for John, and it is that I was talking recently with Ben Cameron from the Duke Charitable Trust, and he talked about coming to Boise and having to drink his way through the dance company. And I think you know what he was talking about. So can you talk about that one little strategy that you did with a local business?
Yeah, Ben got pretty lit that night. Yeah. Well, I think what we're talking about is, you said it, we have to better monetize process and not just product. But to what you're saying, you also just don't want to hear a vision. How is it being implemented? What is the business? What is the sound strategy behind it? In Mr. Secretary, to what you were saying, in this world right now of trying to find new economies, innovation is the buzzword. So what are the new pathways that we're discovering that are going to take us to a new way of making money? That's how the economy and the business world is thinking of. Well, we as artists are the most innovative, creative people on the planet. We are, but why are we not? I've heard someone say innovation is creativity monetized. So really, we're the most creative people. All we have to do is take that next step into turning it into a system or a pathway or a method in which you can then give it value. Artists are also sometimes the worst at valuing their own product. But I think one of the biggest products we have is process. Inviting people to be a part of how we make our art and the insights into who the artists are as human beings is the biggest untapped resource we as artists have. So we do a project that was envisioned by Trey McIntyre every year. We call it 10+1. There's 10 dancers in the company plus Trey. And every year he asks 30 different artists in the Boise community to do a portrait of the members of the company. It culminates, it's a year-long collaboration where we get to know these artists, they get to know us, and it culminates in a 2-week art gallery show, and I say that loosely, art gallery, where we sell the product of this collaboration, and half the proceeds go to TMP and half go to the artist, and half is a larger cut than most galleries are giving them. But the artists are a local band who make a song about each dancer, and then Trey makes a music video. The artists are painters, sculptors, chandelier makers. I have a chandelier made after me. But one of my favorites was the Modern Hotel and Bar. The mixologist made a cocktail about each dancer. And you can go into this bar and drink that cocktail, and it becomes a whole story about who this dancer is and why this cocktail was created in this way and what are the flavors that went into it and the colors and the textures. And Michael, the mixologist, will tell you all of this. So it's also a way that our community is better getting to know the humans that make up this company. And it's still a small revenue source, but it continues to be a source of conversation. You asked me about it here. But I think we as artists get too caught up in the ticketed events, and we think that's how we're going to make our money. But it's not the ticketed events anymore. We're not going to be able to get 2,000 people to sit in a dark theater, turn off their cell phones, and pay to be there. That's not as common in the world we live in. So, yes, we have to monetize. How do we go into hospitals and give our art, and how does healthcare pay for that?
Bob, it struck me as someone on the panel, kind of, or several, I guess, made reference to local, and I think Laura spoke to, if it's somewhere else, it must be better. But I think we're in a different world, and it's related to social media and related to the ubiquity of CNN and headline news and all. So we live in this huge, at least domestic American community and maybe global community, to where we see things in other places, and in an ironic way, it makes local more important, because people see not everything that's done elsewhere is that much better than what is local. There is no substitute for what you can touch, feel, see in the community. And by the way, the local gets better exposed as it is more broadly. So it just strikes me that in this kind of interconnected world, what's local becomes more dear. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
So I'd like to take that and go to Maria first, and then to Dennis. I'd like Dennis to think a little bit about where we started in this conversation, strategies to accomplish some of the kinds of things that we're talking about. I'll come to you next. But Maria, one of the things that we talked about on the phone was authentic experiences, as experiences based on the community that's already there, versus created experiences. And I'd love you to just talk about, both are great strategies, but what you meant by that, and whether bellying up to the bar and ordering 3 John Michael shirts is which category that falls in. I'm going to do that next time I'm in Boise.
Well, I think one of the most exciting things about the concept of placemaking is that underlying notion of authenticity. And it gets to the local idea that places become valuable, important, promote attachment, if you will, because of their authenticity, because they are reflections of the people who live there. In my own work, and I come out of an urban planning background, when I started doing work around arts and culture almost 20 years ago, people would ask sometimes, you're supposed to be concerned with low-income communities. Why are you doing this arts and culture stuff? And I used to not have an immediate answer for it. I had a gut that it was intrinsically important. But I've been thinking that if you look at the world throughout the ages, strategies to weaken populations have typically first included stripping people from their ability to authentically express. So why wouldn't strategies that are intended to build have as their core that kind of consideration? That ability to recognize that the creation of community, the creation of place, the creation of identity is in fact that thing that endures many other things. I think about New Orleans, for example, and people coming back after Katrina, and in many cases it was the people that had the most connection to place through tradition and their art form that felt compelled to come back. So I think we're at a moment now where there's a revival of interest in comprehensive strategies, and it happens in cycles. About every 25 years or so, 30 years, there's this revival of interest in comprehensive strategies. And I'm really pleased that there is some effort at the local level to integrate arts and culture into these strategies as a core thing. But our bureaucracies, I think locally and nationally, are not built to make that an easy thing to do. We work in silos, and the arts are often thought of, as was said before, as the thing that comes at the end if it's thought about at all. So the work is really not only in reframing what we mean by arts and culture and why it's important, but in building the mechanisms at various levels where that integration can happen.
It also sounds like there's the need for arts organizations, particularly local arts agency type organizations, to do a lot of rethinking of relationship from both sides. There's the side rethinking how, as in Boise, the example of how the arts organization, the authentic community experience, how it relates to other parts of the community, not necessarily changing the dance or changing the authentic experience, but changing the relationship. And then the same thing from the other side that was talked about when you were speaking, that different aspects of community having a better understanding of the relationship with the arts that's in a different way, that's in a problem-solving way, not in a decorative way. So with that, I'd like to come back to Dennis for some thoughts on strategies. And I think I see a chorus forming behind you as a random act, but don't look back there, just eyes forward. So.
We finished random act number 936 last night, so we're almost there. I promised 1,000. The financial crisis had a silver lining. The silver lining was that it forced us to engage because we woke up one day and we were all fighting for our lives. That has had a profound effect on how we go forward. A lot of communities got zeroed out when it comes to the cultural budget, but a lot more didn't. And the reason they didn't was because for the first time, they picked up the opportunity to go and engage. In my community, my Department of Cultural Affairs, led by Michael Spring, Debbie Margle, who are here today, they packed the house. When the commission met to decide who was going to get cut and who didn't, 2,000 or so artists, arts advocates, arts administrators came and showed the commissions what it meant to their community. We saw Randy do that yesterday with the numbers. But as a field, we don't love to engage in that. We think in some way it's beneath us, but yet we want what comes from it. So the financial crisis, the silver lining of the financial crisis, has forced a lot of us to engage for the first time. And I think that's going to carry forward. In addition to that, there is this confluence of circumstance. The urbanness of our lives lends itself to artistic endeavor because that's generally where we populate. There is a feeling, there is a snowball rolling down the hill about the impact of what we do as organizations in our community economically. That confluence of circumstance doesn't happen very often. We have to seize this moment, and we have to make sure that we are viewed on an equal dignity with the other opportunities that are out there, whether it's workforce or whether it's housing or things like that. We matter as much to our community as any of those other social services aspects and other line items in the budget.
Floyd.
Rodney King says, why can't we all get along, right? There is power in collaboration. When folks come together for sort of a common good in communities, we've seen historically when businesses and civic-minded, political-minded folks come together, the city becomes very vibrant, the community becomes very strong economically, socially, spiritually. But in that, everyone has a point of differentiation. And I think arts organizations have an incredible opportunity to redefine themselves and understand what makes them different than other organizations that exist in the same space. And when you find a point of differentiation, then you're able to partner with folks that you may not necessarily see as potential partners, which then creates a sort of a broader opportunity for you to even gain exposure, revenue, and presence.
One of the themes that's on the rise is the sense of identity. And something that we've been really thinking a lot about is the sense of ownership. How does a community feel ownership for what exists there? Local is cool now. Regionalism is sort of on the rise. And I think you, as arts organizations, want to feel like what you're providing is a value to your community, but also more than that, you want the community to feel that you are of value to them. So how do you create that level of ownership through the grassroots methods and means? But I think you do have to state it. You have to state it, and you have to almost be incredibly firm and at times strong-arm that we deserve and are a part of the value that this city has. We bring value in so many different ways. When the Chamber of Commerce is having businesses come to town to consider moving to Boise, they asked Trey McIntyre Project to be at the table, and we're one of the success stories from a business standpoint of what it means to move to Boise. When you fly in and out of the Boise airport, the first thing you see is the Trey McIntyre Project Cultural Ambassador banner welcoming you to the city. That didn't happen. The city didn't think of that. We thought of that. And it was all this bureaucratic red tape with the airport being city-owned, but the artists have to push that through. And so I think you have to be very firm, and you have to understand what the city wants to get out of it, or what a hospital wants to get out of it, or what a university wants to get out of it. All of our dancers get a free undergraduate education from Boise State University because the university wants to say that our dancers are students at their university. So you have to find out what their sweet spot is and then go about negotiating.
I think too, though, and some of you who work with city government or different aspects of the business community, I think that you and the company have realized that you have to commit a sort of an ongoing process as opposed to sort of a momentary or a one-off process in order to make that happen. And love people's comments on that. But I'll just give one example. The connection that I talked about in my comments to building strategic alliances with groups that are not arts groups that we started with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. That relationship, if it had just been once, would have been nice, but it would have been meaningless. It has to be ongoing, every year, constant connection, working with, and that takes a mindset change on the part of arts organizations in order to be able to do that. Laura?
Well, and I think this is very much what you've done, Bob, but frankly, I think you have to go to the top of the pyramid. I think you have to go right to the decision makers. I think, and in most communities, those are politically elected officials who, in my experience, actually get it faster and have more vision than the folks who have been in the trenches, in the departments, kind of doing things the same way for a long time. And if we've had successes in LA County, it's been because our leadership has gone out in front and said, okay, this is the way we're going to do it. And we've had to drag the Department of Public Works kicking and screaming all along the way. They're getting with the program. But unless someone said to them, this is important, this is who we are as a community, this is what we're going to place at the center, and you guys have to work together. So figure it out. And I think that we sometimes hesitate to go directly to the decision makers. And in the end of the day, our elected officials are responding to exactly the same constituents who we are serving every day. And so they hear from those constituents in terms of their direct experiences and benefits. And I have found that to be the fastest point of connection.
And I'll just add to that, too, as a strategy, going to the top is absolutely key. Because I have found in the 20 strategic alliances that we've built with the public sector, mayors, city councils, counties, or the private sector, conference board, committee to encourage corporate philanthropy, all of those partnerships that we've built, it took us years of no's at the staff level to finally get a yes when you can actually get to the leadership level. The leaders want to partner. The leaders actually have been thinking about this too. And that's, so finding ways to cut through that, and we are the community of creativity, we can find ways to cut through that and get there.
From my years as council member and mayor, I remember a lot of sort of really contentious conversations with artists um, because, as you said, the artist is creative and frequently has been independent and apart for a lifetime. So it's very difficult to get artists to play on teams the way the rest of the community team has to play. Economic development people, business people, political people, etc. And Henry Kissinger said the most contentious politics is academic politics. He probably hasn't been involved in arts politics. But the very nature of the being is combustible and independent and frequently angry and frustrated because of the unfairness of how hard people work and how little they make and how difficult it is to keep an organization going. And so it makes it again, I want to go back to that point about finding the language that allows some measure of teamwork, some measure of involvement. And I think that's a really major issue in most communities. Now, I think there is, a tip-off in Maria's point about authenticity in what that language could be. And it is the language of authenticity place by place, because cities have to distinguish themselves from one another. You can't be a place if you don't have an identity. And what better identity than authentic, genuine flow up of what that place is? New Orleans is there, but it took a long time to get there. Memphis defined itself as a different, it's not New Orleans, it's kind of like New Orleans, but it's Memphis, and it's paying off, as a place. Memphis is a very progressive place these days, both politically and economically. And you could go on around the map, but the whole idea of places being able to be a brand, a city as a brand, and oh my God, we don't have to compromise. We can be ourselves, we can be genuine, and that becomes our brand if we do this right. That's a big idea.
As a part of the story, it goes back to my point of differentiation, really knowing exactly who you are and the value you bring. But a part of the storytelling is about what is the economic impact your organization makes towards the city or to the place. Quantify exactly what it is that you are doing with regards to the economic impact, and use that as a part of your story as well. Not just that we do great art, but because of our great art, we're generating X amount of revenue, we're bringing X amount of visitors to the city, and ultimately X amount of dollars are being spent as a result of the work that we're being done. Name the value. And then people who are looking for strong and tangible ROIs will say, wow, I'm going to go fund that because I know that I'm going to get some type of return on investment for the dollars that we spend.
If we don't name it as the artist, no one's going to name it for us. If we don't say it's worth this, no one will ever give that back. Athletics have done such a great job of building that sense of community identity, and you support your team. Boise State. The blue carpet. Exactly. But why can't we as arts organizations do the same? And that's sort of been one of our goals. How do we be on par with Boise State? How does the city and the community of Boise uphold us the same level they do a football team? And I think sometimes when you say that to other artists, they think, well, we don't want to be athletics. Yeah. Don't give away anything that is unique and special about who we are as artists, but use that model. Every major American city wants to have an NFL team or a Major League Baseball team. Change the conversation, say every major American city should and wants to have a name brand dance company or opera organization or symphony, and put them forward. And if we do that, it becomes a commodity, and it becomes a monetized thing that those cities can make money off of as well, to say we have this name brand choreographer in residence, or we have this name brand visual artist in residence in our city.
But it's also more than what's in it for me. I think arts organizations have a tendency to come to us and say, we have great art, it's about us, et cetera. And I think you need to change the story and to say, what we do can benefit you. So who we are can make you better as a corporation. What we are doing can make your people healthier as a population. What we are doing can bring significant value to your constituents overall. And when you look at it that way, then you go into the true spirit of partnership. Because we're funding because you're doing great art. You're doing great art because you're making our people better.
One of the things that really gets my attention in this notion of authenticity and the role of arts organizations and artists is the idea that we really need to redefine who artists are and what they contribute to society. And I think the default is that artists make things, art products, to be bought, or that artists appear only on stage or on screen. And the work that I've done for many years looking at the role of artists in communities, in fact, artists have many different kinds of relationships to publics. And I think one of the most compelling things that artists do is that they help regular people take responsibility for their own creativity, their own humanity, and their own sense of person. And if we understood, if there was a societal understanding that that is one of the many big roles of artists, I think the value that we can import or apply to that identity of artists would be very different from what is true now. And just very quickly, a couple of years ago, I had the privilege to follow a class of Master of Fine Arts students in a small town. They were doing a project, and I followed their work. They were socially engaged artists, public practice, aspiring to do what, say, Mel Chin does, who was honored here this morning. And in going back and talking with people in the communities where they worked, they thought that the students were nice, that they did interesting things, but in the end, they were surprised that the students left without making murals. And the expectation was that artists make murals, without recognizing that artists were doing their art when they were working in the schools, or when they were working with communities and trying to help them envision something that they couldn't envision before. So I think that there's a great deal of work to be done in recrafting how we think about the role of artists in society as a dimension of all of this.
Back to the process issue.
So a little experiment in creativity that we wanted to try today, rather than questions from the audience. We're actually going to have each table out there be a discussion point on what we've been talking about, and we would ask each of the panelists to just join one of the tables and have a creative conversation, and have a scribe at each table just take down some ideas, which we will collect and try to have a series of new thoughts about strategies to do what we're talking about here. But before we do that, I'd like to go back through the panel and do the same 1-minute exercise, although Dennis gets more than 1 minute because he's had his hand up several times. Just any final thoughts on the kind of things that we've been talking about here. I didn't get to ask my question about the creative placemaking in the business itself, in the business community that Floyd does so much with. And on the authenticity part, when I go around the country now, I actually often start in a speech by simply asking how many people out there sing in a chorus, how many people play an instrument, how many people write a poem. And at the end of those 3 questions, every hand is up. So we have an entire creative community out there that doesn't necessarily think of itself in that way. So a 1 minute across the board here, and then 10 minutes out there at the tables, if so. Dennis.
I'm going to take my little bit of extra time and ask the secretary to answer a question for me. We're going to be involved in the launch of a new idea. It's called the Initiative for Sustainable Arts in America. It's going to launch in the fall, and it's a grassroots movement to establish a national arts policy. And I'm wondering, Mr. Secretary, having sat at that cabinet level table, what roadmap would you give us for this group, because this is the art world right here, what roadmap would you give us to create and chase and secure a cabinet level position for culture in this country?
I would say it's a very tough road, because government is in the business of contraction these days. If you believe what the candidates have said over the course of the last months, they're talking about departments they will eliminate, not departments that will be added. And I suspect in this climate, political and economic, hard to make the argument. But if you do want to go down that path, it would be an aggregation of the existing arts efforts, like the National Endowment and other strategies, public television, other things that are disparate throughout the government that could be organized in a rational way, and linked to the national interest, economic interest, community building interest, and such. So that's, in general terms, the beginnings of a roadmap.
Maria.
Dennis, just saying sustainability made me think that getting the arts into the water in how we think about healthy places to live, viable communities, sustainable communities. There's been some work in that regard in the last several years that I think is really important progress, but it's a long haul, and I think it requires some paradigmatic shifts in how we think about arts organizations, how we think about artists, and how we think about people as creative beings in cities, and what that collectively can amass, what that can contribute to an urban renaissance. But it's a long haul.
Urban Renaissance being a good goal. So, Laura.
I think that's a terrific initiative, particularly during a time of contraction and recession, because as we all know, this is the best time to be planning and laying the groundwork for big ideas, because resources will start to flow again, and when they do, the people who are teed up will be the first to take advantage of them. You know, what I kept hearing you say, Mr. Secretary, is that if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And I heard that throughout. And one of the things that I'm happy to reflect on the part of the field is that I hope that since the time that contentious artists were coming to you when you were mayor, the way in which we approach advocacy and the conversation, I think, has really shifted. Artists do understand that they not only can but are the solution and are presenting themselves within that framework. I want to do a shout out to Arts for LA, our fantastic advocacy organization in Los Angeles. If you haven't looked at the website, you want to see how an arts advocacy organization can coalesce people around positive ideas about contributing to solutions for local government. That would be a great place to look. I think we have done that, and I think we can continue to do that.
As with us, I think it's very important for arts organizations to see themselves as a business and to create a sustainability model, to understand who you are today, look at the economic trends, create your vision for tomorrow based on environmental trends, based on what's happening in the communities and around the world, looking at technology and other types of forms of media that are existing for you to get your craft out, and then executing in a way that you're not one day some hallucination or someone's memory.
Thank you. John Michael.
I think always keeping in mind we're here to inspire, and how can we inspire a community to aspire to something more as well, and not just with our own little piece of delivering this is what we are, but how can we be the thought leaders for our communities, and then, because it's necessary, monetize those efforts. The artists themselves getting paid to be the thought leaders in a way that gives identity and ownership to each community in a unique way, so that each city in America or each neighborhood within those cities can have their own sense of place because of the great artists and thought leaders that reside there.
And last word.
Well, I don't want to over-harp on this point. Maybe it's a product of my experience, but I don't think the things we're talking about can be advanced by setting artists apart or above. The kind of the arrogance of the creative looking down on other people, whether they be business or whether they be neighborhood people, or I mean, if anybody ought to understand our common humanity, it's artists. And Floyd, you know, you're hearkening Rodney King, can we just get along, seems to me a unique contribution that artists can make, because as I said in my remarks, it's about human connections. But to create human connections, you have to love and respect and truly relate in a humane way with people. And I think that's a unique thing that artists can do in our society, and we can't afford to lose that. I don't go as far as Floyd does on the mercantilistic kind of business side, as in everything else in life, there's a tension, and the tension here has to be between that celebration of the humane juxtaposed against the business and political realities.
Lots of wonderful perspectives. I am going to ask everybody to stay for another 10 minutes and talk and write a few ideas that Americans for the Arts can then get back to all of you about how we can harness the energy of the new thinking. And as you prepare for the panel to come out there, I want to say thank you to a great panel. Thank you to everybody. Absolutely terrific. And I want to say, Mr. Secretary, it is great to have you back with us, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.